there's been question marks over Leinster before.
If it's half a metre plus a few centimetres the other side, he's a hero and Leinster have got the monkey off their back.
And I didn't know whether to say this or not, but I have to say with how I feel about it.
We start with Leinster against Toulouse. Yeah, I mean, hell of a ding-dong.
Who did you have? Well, I know you had. Maybe tell the listeners who you had, because I tweeted out Leinster by 8, and people are coming back at me going, oh, that aged well.
Yeah,
well, it's a 50-50 game. You had to pick someone. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. I went Leinster by 6, to be fair. I thought it was their time. They've obviously beaten Toulouse the last 4 times they've played them in big semi-finals, a couple over the last 2 years. And I knew, listen, this Toulouse team were phenomenal, but the game didn't pan out as anyone thought, because everyone thought it would be kind of Toulouse's attack coming up against Leinster's defence. The whole Nienaber effect of how Leinster have changed and evolved their defence this year to try and win a trophy, his influence, Nienaber on what he's done with the South Africans, winning back-to-back World Cups, having that absolute winning mentality, even to a point of he's water boy in the second half, isn't he? Which I love, by the way. People are like, he shouldn't be water boy. And we go back to the Razzie thing when he was water boy and T-boy or whatever it was. I ain't got a problem with it. Just let them do what they want to do, right? But I thought it was Leinster's time. You lose a couple of finals with the hurt that they've had. You harness that hurt. And that comes into victories. You look historically over the teams that have won the Champions Cup finals, they've always had a bump in the road, a loss in a final or a semi-final. You go back to Saracens' days. They had a couple of tough ones. I remember, was it Johnny Wilkinson dropped a goal and patted Faz on the back of the head. Then a couple of years later or a year later, Saracens go on and start creating, their mini dynasty of winning it. Leinster had issues and then they've got over the line 6 years ago, whenever it was. Toulon, La Rochelle lost, didn't they, to Toulouse a few years back at Twickenham. Then they've gone back to back and obviously got knocked out by Leinster this year. So in my mind, it was that. It was all the things coming together of Nienaber, Leinster's pain, their dominance over Toulouse over the last few years. And it was going to be Toulouse's attack and exuberance and offloading game against Leinster's defence. But it didn't turn out like that at all, did it? It was the other way around. It was Leinster's faltering attack because they had so much possession, didn't they? And the stats, when you look back at the stats, if you purely looked at the stats of the game, you'd expect Leinster to win that game, but it just shows the mettle and the ability of Anton Dupont and the whole Toulouse physicality in their defence, because that's what's won them the game. The scramble at the back when they've had line breaks against them, when they've given up meters, the breakdown, and the big difference. And I feel a bit guilty because we obviously talked on here a little bit about Leinster and what they got away with in the semi-final against Northampton, crawling around breakdowns. And, we sort of talked about Caelan Doris doing the odd thing here or there, just getting away with it. And I think Leinster prepped for the game, knowing it's an English referee in Matt Carley, and didn't go anywhere near as hard at the breakdown as Toulouse did. Toulouse just thought, fuck it, we are going physical, we are turning balls over, jackling balls, and if we start getting pinged for it, we'll probably change. But they won the breakdown battle. They won the amount of turnovers.
Yeah, they went full Molfo, didn't they?
Yeah,
they went full Emmanuel Molfo.
Yeah, and he's a fucking absolute big mofo, isn't he? But they all were like.
We'll get onto him. Just on that, we'll get onto him. He came off, went back on, came back off again. I couldn't work it out. I watched it back. Anyway, sorry, go on. You keep going.
Imagine,
it's fine.
So imagine him, right? Yeah, imagine him, 135 clicks or whatever he is, having to come off. You put in a shift, then you come off, stiffen up like a board, then you're back on, son. But they emptied the tanks, Toulouse did, defensively. And it wasn't a sort of classic attacking performance from them, the offloading. And Leinster will look back at it and say, we had loads of opportunities that we weren't accurate enough. And maybe there's been too much focus on how they've changed their defence completely this year, and their attack has taken a bit of a hit and hasn't been as fluent because of that. And maybe that's the difference. But if we're being honest, people are talking about Leinster have lost another final. Frawley has the drop goal to win it with 30 odd seconds to go, doesn't he? If that goes over, it misses.
Al Pacino.
Yeah, it misses by half a metre. If it's half a metre plus a few centimetres the other side, he's a hero and Leinster have got the monkey off their back and we're having a completely different conversation. But you got to talk about just the jackling, the tackling. Toulouse's defence was phenomenal, which you don't often associate with a Toulouse team or a French team necessarily, do you? And that's what's won them it. Just that pure bloody mindedness, never say die. We're going to attack every breakdown. We're going to scramble like hell and basically die for the jersey. I was in the tunnel before the game and I saw Ugo Mola, my old brief coach, who's now the Toulouse head coach, came and gave me a hug. I think that's what happens. Whenever I hug a head coach before or during a Champions Cup final, they fucking win it. Rog last 2 years on the spin, and then this year it was Ugo Mola. So apologies, it's my fault.
Producer Rob here, and before we get back to the action, let's talk about online security and VPNs. I trust NordVPN to keep my data safe, and you should too. With NordVPN, you can access rugby content from anywhere in the world, and you know that you're going to be doing it safely. And we've got an exclusive deal for RugbyPod viewers. You can get 4 months extra and a 30-day money-back guarantee. So protect yourself online and support the RugbyPod by signing up at www.nordvpn.com/rugbypod. Stay safe, stay connected.
Yeah, I'll tell you what, like the defence, that was what I was surprised at how joined up Toulouse were, like on the line. And so that was what in the stadium watching it, and how difficult was what we were saying when we were sat next to each other. You can't really get a gauge on the game properly, but you get a really good view of the defence. And so in the stadium and then watching it back on TV, it was how joined up they were in defence. Like Costa was absolutely immense, wasn't he? Like the back three, like how they were closing off as well was phenomenal. Like we mentioned upon, like Intermat, the physicality, but everything on the gain line. And this is where there's been question marks over Leinster before, and is the power game. So when you've got Molful fucking breaking the gain line just right, I know Leinster did a few times, like Dan Sheehan made a wicked break, opportunist kind of break off the back of that, and we did see a couple of breaks through the centre and stuff like that, but the battle of the gain line, and that's where Leinster were always behind for the majority of the game, weren't they? They were always behind on the scoreboard, they levelled it, always behind, levelled it. But they're lacking, and yes, they're bringing in RG Snyman, and we're nitpicking here, right? Because you have to a little bit, because you're looking at like, right, well, how do they get the monkey off the back, and how do they change that game? Well, James Lowe goes in the bin, Toulouse score, and that was a massive moment for them, and Frawley could have dropped the goal, so there was nothing in it. But if you are looking at kind of little things about like where could they improve, like the power game is one. And they got outpowered for sure. And I didn't know whether to say this or not, but I have to say with how I feel about it. They didn't take the points, and Ross Byrne on a couple of the penalties has kicked a corner. I'm not saying I would have kicked it. I think you would have. Producer Rob's nodded his head like he might have. They're easy kicks to kick. If that's Sexton, they're going 5 metres, right? As in 5 metres out from the try line. Is there 8 or 9 out? And then that changes because they never really, I know they got close, they got held up, Josh van der Fleer, and they were talking about the millimetres and the inches, but in them big games, them extra 3 metres from a kick out of hand is the difference between Toulouse competing up in the air and making a bit of a shit fight and a dog fight out of it and swimming up the side and not. And they were just missing a couple of things. And at that level, and when decisions go or don't go your way, and there are them kind of 50-50s, like them small things, why are you not kicking for goal? And maybe because in their mind they're like, right, you had to put 40 points on Toulouse. Like, you got to score tries against Toulouse because they could score tries. Yeah.
Well, I mean, I'll tell you what, Ross Byrne's a good goal kicker, but he's not distance, right? So some of the penalties he should have taken, and the difference was Blair Kinghorn knocking over penalties for fun in that first half from range, like from distance, 10-metre lines, from angles. Ramos comes on. He had a fucking shocker under the high ball, Ramos, but his goal kicking, I know he missed one, I think, but his goal kicking for those penalties, they're all long ranges. They're not like close ones. And that was the difference between the two teams. Toulouse took those opportunities, went for posts. Leinster kept going for line-outs, and okay, it paid off when they eventually scored the try with Josh van der Fleer. And I was sort of saying, when you're 10 points down in extra time, you got that penalty after Arnold's just been sent off, take the 3. But they went and scored the try, got the conversion, then they were 3 points down. But I think, like, you look at their signings for next year, so RG Snyman's coming, so's Geordie Barrett. Like, Geordie Barrett is one of the best long-range goal kickers in the world. He's got one of the biggest boots I've ever seen, up there with Franz Stein in terms of how far he can nudge a penalty from. And that maybe is the difference. Byrne at 10, and I feel bad saying this, and this is coming from me, right? I was a static fly half, and the game's changed.
You're a what?
I was a static. I was static fly half, right? But the game's changed. The best fly halves are in motion. Like, you look at Finn Russell, you look at Untermack, you look at Marcus Smith, the top fly halves, Jalibert, Bowden Barrett, or you look across, I think, the world now and how the game's played. The fly halves are in motion, they're a threat, they're attacking the line, and they are a genuine option. Like, I'd be fucked if I played rugby now. I'd be a third team player probably, because I didn't have that attacking ability where you have to keep defences honest. And that's what I think. Like, you watch Byrne, he's taking the ball a little bit deeper. It's quite static. It's just shoveling on passes that, they didn't have to worry about him defensively. And I think that was a big thing. I don't want to label it all on him. I know a lot of the Leinster fans are trying to do that because it's the easy target. And they probably didn't lose the game solely because of that. Caelan Doris gives that real dumb penalty away in extra time, which was a bit of a momentum shift where he slaps the ball on the floor, doesn't he, playing it back when he's off his feet. And that was probably a frustration thing that they were getting battered at the breakdown. But their attack's not fluid. And they didn't have Byrne's not a long-range goal kicker in the mould of Blair Kinghorn, what he produced, and what's Thomas Ramos, I was going to call him Sergio Ramos, but Thomas Ramos did when he came on. And that was the very small differences. And we know what it's like. The top level, it's the tiniest of percentages that wins and loses you games. And you go back to the drop goal, Frawley slots it, he's a hero, they're lifting the trophy, right? And we're having a completely different conversation. And that'll haunt him for a bit. But maybe their move now, Leinster, and I hate saying this, is to back Frawley as a 10, because everyone's sort of talked about him as where he should play. I know he's played fullback, but he's a natural 10. And so maybe that's the next thing to try and win the URC, back Frawley at 10 and let the boy play and play with some more endeavour in attack and attack the line a bit more from 10. And that's coming from me, and I was shit at attacking the line. So while I'm honest, I feel bad saying it.
Pod.
Rugby pod.